Hi and hello everyone. This is Siva with Kanishka today. So today we are gonna talk about an interesting topic today, which is about high deficit financing versus high interest rate. Can these two forces exist or not? So this is the topic today, and I'm with Kanishka. Thank you, Kanishka, for being here. So let's straightly go into the session. So the thing is, before we jump into, let's start with the basics, which is what exactly I mean is the deficit financing and interest rate. So these are terms we hear a lot in the news as well, but what are their implications for an economy and how do they interact with each other? So let's see in detail about it. So what's your opinion, Kanishka, about this?
Okay, so Pradeesh, now I am going to explain about the understanding deficit financing. This is the segment 1, and in segment 1, let's start with the deficit financing in simple terms. A deficit financing happens when a government spends more money than it earns in revenue. This creates a budget deficit as a situation where the government needs to borrow money to cover its expenses, and governments usually finance this deficit through borrowing, typically by issuing bonds or taking a loans. Now you might ask, why would the government run a deficit in the first place? Well, it's not always a bad thing. Because government often engage in deficit spending during economic downturns, recessions, or crisis to stimulate growth. Think of it as injecting money into the economy, spending more on infrastructure, social programs, or even tax cuts to boost economic activity. In many cases, this spending it's critical to keeping the economy afloat during tough times. Next will be explained by the Shiva Pratish.
So nice one, Kanishka. So the next thing I want to stress is we have to understand about the interest rate as well. So now let's switch gears and talk about what interest rate is all about. So interest rate represents the cost of buying money. That's it. So they are set by the country's central bank as well, like Reserve Bank of India, in the Federal Reserve, in the United States as well. So what central bank sets interest rates? They're essentially deciding how expensive it will be for people, businesses, and governments to borrow money as well. So what's the impact of high interest rates? The thing is, when interest rates are high, borrowing becomes so expensive as well. So consumers might cut back on spending as well. So business may delay investments. That's one of the outcome, and governments has to pay more to service their debts as well. So in contrast, interest rates encourage borrowing, which stimulates spending and investment, but it also fuels inflation. It's not managing if managed properly. So what's about your opinion, Kanishka?
Yes, Shiva. Segment 3, the conflict between deficit financing and high interest rates. So can high deficit financing and high interest rates go together? In theory, they are often seen as a conflicting forces, and let's break down why. Borrowing cost for the government. When a government runs a high deficit, it needs to borrow money. If interest rates are also high, the cost of that borrowing becomes much more expensive. Essentially, the government is paying more in interest on the loans, and it takes out to the finance its deficits. This can lead to the vicious cycle where the government debt grows faster than the economy, creating long-term finance problems and crowding out effect. Another issue is something economists call the crowding out effect. When the government borrows heavily, it competes with private businesses for capital. If interest rate are high, it becomes more expensive for business to borrow and invest, which can show down private sector growth. In the long run, this could stifle innovation, job creation, and economic expansion. Next will be the inflation and the monetary policy. Here is another angle. High deficit financing can lead to inflation. When the government spends a lot of money, it injects liquidity into the economy. If the money supplies grow too fast, it can drive up prices, and in response central banks may raise interest rate to control inflation. But if the government continues with a high deficit spending even as our interest rates rise, it can create a tug of war between fiscal policy and the government spending, and monetary policy, the central bank's interest or rate management. Next will be explained by Shiva.
So the thing is, we have discussed about the both two situations, what they are all about, and the thing is are these situations both can coexist or not? This is a question. So the thing is, the conflict between the high deficit financing and high interest rates. So let's consider where there are situations where two can coexist and even complement to each other. It's all about like during economical crisis, we all know on 2009 which what happened. So during the periods of economic crisis such as financial downturn or global pandemic like to the COVID 2019, both high deficit financing and high interest rate may coexist out of necessity, right? So governments often need to run large deficits to fund emergency relief program, healthcare and other critical areas, while central banks might still need to maintain its relatively high interest rates to keep inflation under control. So both played their role very well. It's a delicate balance, but extraordinary circumstances, governments and central banks can operate in a challenging environment temporarily. So another thing is all about strong economic growth. Strong economic growth in the sense there are situations where an economy might be experiencing rapid growth. In such cases, even if the government is running a deficit, the economy may be growing fast enough that it can handle high interest rate without shifting growth as well. Yet growth can generate more tax revenue, helping the government manage its deficit even with high borrowing costs. This is more likely in advanced economics where the financial systems are well developed and can absorb the pressure as well. So it's all about thing. Another thing is managing inflation. We all know in economics as well, facing inflammatory pressures, central banks may need to raise interest rates to keep inflation in check, even while the government continues to run a deficit at least. So in this is a trickiest situation, though with high interest rate can cool down inflation, but can also make it harder for the government to finance its deficits as well. Here coordination between fiscal policy and monetary policy becomes crucial. So if the government and central banks work in a harmony, they can potentially balance that deficit with high interest rate, though it's a right walk always. So what's your opinion on this, Kritika?
It's sure, Pratish. Next I'm going to explain about the segment 5, that is a real world examples. What happens when both coexist? Let's take a look at some real world examples to see how it is plays out. And the United States post 2018 financial crisis. After the 2008 financial crisis, the US government engaged in massive deficit financing to bail out industries and stimulate the economy. At the same time, the Federal Reserve kept interest rates low to encourage borrowing and investment. However, as the economy recovered, the Fed gradually raised interest rates to prevent the economy from overheating. This shows that while deficit financing and low interest rates can go together for a while, eventually central banks need to tighten monetary policy to avoid inflation and other imbalances. And next will be India's experience. In India, deficit financing has been a recurring theme, especially in periods of economic slowdown or crisis. The government has run high deficits to fund infrastructure, welfare schemes and economic stimulus. However, in times of inflationary pressure, the Reserve Bank of India has raised interest rates, which makes borrowing more expensive for both the private sector and the government. India's challenge has been to find the right balance between fiscal expansion and monetary tightening. And next will be concluded by the Siva.
So let me conclude the session is like that key is the balance. Whatever the session what we have, high interest rate and high the deficit. So high deficit financing as well high interest rate, they can coexist, but it's just when it comes to challenging situation, they need a balance as well. So this is what I like to conclude, and thank you Kanishka for being here. It's a wonderful insightful conversation that we had about this wonderful topic, and thank you for having this time for me, and thank you.
Thank you.